Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the duo of Gyarados and Milotic. Now, even though I think that Gyarados and Milotic are going to do very well, they do have one big flaw, and that's that we're not going to start with Gyarados and Milotic today. Instead, we're going to be starting with their pre-evolutions, Magikarp and Feebas. Now, these two Pokemon are well known for being very bad, but how bad could they really be, right? Well, Magikarp has 20 HP, 10 attack, 55 defense, 15 special attack, 20 special defense at 80 speed, which strangely enough makes it a special attacker, but at least a 55 base defense is pretty decent, and 80 speed is actually really good. Unfortunately, it only gets Splash at level 10, so it's not going to be able to do anything for a while. So that's where Feebas comes in with 20 HP, 15 attack, 20 defense, 10 special attack, 55 special defense, and 80 speed, and unlike Magikarp, actually gets attacking moves. Unfortunately, we don't have access to any attacking moves. We get Attract and Mimic at the start of the game. Unfortunately, Attract is stuck behind a trainer, so that might be kind of hard to get, but at least Mimic is available, so we can attack things, but it's going to be very roundabout and messy. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Magikarp in particular, which has a gentle nature, raising its special defense but lowering its defense. Not great, but it could be useful. It gets the Swift Swim ability, which doubles its speed and rain, and of course it gets Splash. And for our Feebas, it has a naive nature, raising its speed but lowering its special defense, which is honestly fine, because having that extra speed for the late game is going to make a lot of the fights a lot easier, and a little bit of special defense isn't a big deal. It has the Swift Swim ability as well, which doubles my speed in the rain, and it also only gets access to Splash. So with that, the first thing we're going to do is teach Mimic to Feebas to actually allow us to do some sort of damage. And we're going to take on this trainer in particular because, for one, if I can beat him, I get the Attract TM, and for two, he's the best trainer to PP stall against in order to get the move Struggle, as I learned in the Lugia video. And so I'm going to try to replicate that. However, there are two things to note. Number one, I am a Magikarp and a Feebas. I am not a legendary Pokemon, so this is not going to be nearly as easy as I think it is. And two, these Pokemon just keep landing crits, and honestly there's nothing I can really do about it. So unfortunately, the first attempt actually doesn't go that well. I am able to eventually take out Whismur, but I'm not actually able to effectively PP stall all the splashes, and eventually I lose. However, even with the odds completely stacked against me, because Meryl can either use Defense Curl or Tackle, eventually I'm actually able to get to a point where I get to struggle. In fact, this is only the second attempt. So I'm able to slowly whittle down the Meryl, and eventually I'm able to get past this fight with a Magikarp with struggle. Unfortunately, I did have to lose Feebas, which means that Attract isn't going to be nearly as helpful, but I will teach it anyway. Now, my Pokemon are pretty banged up, and I really want to heal Feebas and Teddiursa separate from Magikarp. That way Magikarp's power points can stay at 0. So I put Magikarp in the PC, and unfortunately it immediately heals him to full health and restores all of his PP too. So that's not going to work. So I reset, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the Pokemart in Agate Village, which unfortunately doesn't sell revives. So I go to the one in Gattian Port, which also doesn't sell revives. So after going through every single chest that I have access to, I find that there are no revives in the early game. So what do I decide to do? Well, there is one place I haven't checked, and that's in the Krabby Club. And that's because you have to defeat this sailor, who I was really hoping I didn't have to try to fight, and that's because both of those Pokemon have the move Growl, which lowers my attack by 1 stage, and after just a few turns they can lower me to -6, which at that point I basically do no damage, unless I get a critical hit, and so I'm basically a sitting duck until I go down, which unfortunately happens in this fight. I'm at -6, and despite my best efforts, I am eventually taken down. But on the 5th attempt, I finally make it through, and I'm able to enter the Krabby Club. And what do I find? But nothing. Sure, it's got some chests in here, but none of them have revives. A super potion is nice, though. Anyway, I run into another Feebas. Hello, other Feebas. And we are now an hour and 13 minutes of real time into the run, and I've gone up 1 level, which isn't a great sign. Now, out of desperation, and because I really wanted to change things up, I decided to fight this lady, and that's for a few reasons. Her Pokemon are a little higher level, so they give a little more experience. I can attract Nincada, making it not attack. I can guarantee 3-shot Poochyena if I can get Leech Life from Nincada, and also I get the TM for Bullet Seed, which I can sell for more potions. Unfortunately, it doesn't go so well, and eventually I lose. I decide to swap over to this trainer instead, which has a lower level Pokemon with a higher level one, but Ladybug takes almost no damage from Struggle, so that's not going to work either. And unfortunately, my funds are growing rather thin, so unless I can figure out a way to magically make money up here, I'm going to need to beat the old lady and actually get that TM. Which I'm actually able to do by not using Feebas at all. I just use Struggle with Magikarp. Did take a few attempts, but I get the TM and I can use that to buy a few more potions. Unfortunately, this doesn't really stop the underlying issue of running out of potions and needing more money again. If only there was a way to heal my Pokemon without interacting with Magikarp. So I put Magikarp in the PC, and unfortunately it immediately heals him to full health. Now this might quite possibly be the greatest blunder I have ever made, because I am now 3.5 hours into the run, and I stumbled across the answer right at the beginning of the video and didn't even realize it. And I'm still in the issue of not having money to actually heal Magikarp. If only there was a free way to make money and heal your Pokemon. Allow me to introduce the Berry Guy. Quite possibly the savior of this run, because he gives you a random berry every time you talk to him after a certain amount of time, from what I can tell. And every single one of his berries can be sold for $10, which just so happens after 2 will allow me to afford another potion. However, he can give me Oran berries, which heal 10 HP whenever I get low on health. But anyway, so far I was basing the assumption on it was an amount of steps taken that allows me to get a berry, but I think it's time-based. And I don't even need to leave the area either. I can just do a battle, and once the battle's done, I can come back to him and get another berry. So you'll see me doing a lap around the place, and that's because I thought that it was a certain amount of steps needed. And he still doesn't have it yet. I go back around the corner, turn back around, and now he's got one. I thought it was only once per day, so I didn't think it was a viable strategy. But thanks to him, eventually I'm able to reach level 15 and learn the move Tackle, which will finally start getting this run moving. So I go into my first battle against a trainer who actually progresses the story, go for Tackle, which really isn't doing that much, but it doesn't matter. I go for Attract to get the Zigzagoon not to attack so much, go for another Tackle, and I go for Splash because the Numel has the Oblivious ability, making it immune to Infatuation. And so I go for Tackle and Mimic to steal Tackle from the Zigzagoon, so Feebas can start actually doing some damage. Unfortunately, the tackles from Numel are starting to add up, but luckily the 2 tackles from these 2 are actually enough to take it down after just a couple turns. Feebas is taken down to 4 HP, Tackle finishes off Zigzagoon, and I start dealing damage to the Numel. Growl is going to lower my attack, which is a little unfortunate, but still, the damage is pretty okay. But after Numel hits me with another attack drop, I decide to swap into Teddiursa. That way I can reset the stat changes, and I can bring out Magikarp at full power once again. And so I send him back out and swap it with Feebas, because honestly Feebas getting hit with so many Growls isn't really doing that much damage anyway. And now I am taking a little bit of a gamble, because I am going to be swapping back in Feebas, which definitely goes down to another tackle. However, it's a 50-50 on whether or not it hits me. Unfortunately, it does actually go into Feebas, so it does go down, but that just means more experience for Magikarp, which could still be a good thing. It's almost nothing though. So the first trainer goes down, and surprisingly the second goes down as well. And the third follows, and we get to the old man. Now the only thing that really threatens us is the Abra using Thunder Punch, or using Ice Punch and Fire Punch and getting the status effect Burn or Freeze. Unfortunately, it gets Thunder Punch paralysis right off the bat, but I am able to mimic the Thunder Punch. I get hit with a critical hit Ice Punch, luckily doesn't freeze, go for Thunder Punch to take down the Horsey, then out comes Shroomish, another Ice Punch, another crit, taking me down to 2 HP. Okay, I go for a track to make Shroomish not attack. Feebas goes down, I bring out Teddy Ursa. Now it is just going to be a luck game, hopefully I don't get hit. But I decided to keep Struggle for this attempt because Struggle is 50 base power compared to 35. So unfortunately I take myself down and lose the fight. But after a little bit of training, I get Feebas up to level 15 to learn Tackle as well, and I go into the fight once again. This time with 2 Pokemon immediately being able to attack, I'm able to actually threaten the Abra and start dealing damage. I steal Fire Punch, it hits me with the Thunder Punch with no paralysis this time. Go for Tackle to finish it off, and then out comes Shroomish, go for Fire Punch, which does over half to Shroomish. And I go for Tackle into Horsey, not really doing that much damage. Another Fire Punch finishes off the Shroomish. Go for Tackle and Fire Punch, which isn't very effective. However, Horsey does have a very low special defense stat, and eventually I beat the old man. But that does not mean I'm able to leave the first area yet, and that's because I need to get to level 20. And if I decide to move on, I might not be able to defeat the next trainers coming up, so I decide to get up to level 20 fighting the trainers here that I wouldn't have access to later. So I become Gyarados, and with Gyarados I also get the move Bite, which is always a very nice move to have. Anyway, with the new evolution means new stats. Gyarados has 95 HP, 125 attack, 79 defense, 60 special attack, 100 special defense, and 81 speed. And finally Gyarados gets some good moves. However, it is a bit limited in what it can use because its 125 base attack only applies to the normal and ground type moves it gets, because every other type it gets is a special move, which uses its 60 base special attack. However, having a great variety of moves is always helpful for dealing with threats that would otherwise cause issues. So I think overall it's still going to be great, because Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, and Flamethrower are all great moves. So with that, we go ahead and move on. And the game has one last challenge for me, and that's Egan's Pikachu, which has Thunderbolt and gets taken down by a crit. Okay, well, it was fun while it lasted. Anyway, I move on to the Power Rangers, and I decide to choose Brown because I have super effective damage against Baltoy. And it's time to start just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. And thank you for all the feedback on the previous video about the stat screens. I do think I'm going to be using those for any of the bigger team runs that I do. So thanks for voicing all your opinions in the comments on the previous video. Anyway, with that, Brown is taken down, and we move inside the building. I pick up this Numble here because it's holding the charcoal item, and Gyarados can learn Flamethrower, so it could come in handy. I run into another Feebas. Hello, other Feebas. Goodbye, other Feebas. And at level 20, our Feebas evolves into Milotic. Now, I did have to manually evolve it, and that's because it's a beauty trade evolution, which is kind of strange. But at level 20 it also gets Water Pulse, so I teach that over Splash. And of course, with the new evolution means new stats. Milotic has 95 HP, 60 attack, 79 defense, 100 special attack, 125 special defense at 81 speed. So it is actually going to be able to use just about every move it has, other than Steel and normal type moves. However, its type variety is lacking quite a bit. While having Water and Ice is nice, and Normal is okay, and Twister is something, it's not a huge variety of moves, but it does get Recover, which is an incredible move that heals half of your HP. It also gets the Marvel Scale ability, which whenever I have a status effect will raise my defense by 50%, which could come in handy in certain situations. But anyway, I go ahead and pick up the Carvanha here for the Black Glasses item to raise the damage on Bite. And then I go into the battle against Lovrita. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly. And I'm going to take down Beautifly right away, and that's because Love Disc really can't do any damage. So I double into it, and luckily get a crit finishing off the Beautifly. Not sure if I needed it though. Out comes Roselia, go for Bite, which doesn't really do that much, go for Tackle, which takes it down to half. Now I'm hoping for a flinch, which I get, go for another Bite and Tackle to finish off the Roselia, and once it goes down, unless Tackle misses, okay, that's an unfortunate 5% chance, Gyarados gets Leech Seeded, I go for Bite to finish off the Roselia, and Water Pulse into the Delcatty. Now, Delcatty might actually be able to survive a couple of these. It did get taken down to half, but it could be a range. But with the Leech Seed, it definitely won't go down to another one, so I do need to double into it with Bite, finishing it off, and then all that's left is the Love Disc. Bite takes it down to about 2/3, and I take it down to 1/4, and one last Bite finishes it off. So with that, Lovrina is taken down, and we move on to the obligatory Mirror Bee. It's so good to see you today, Mirror Bee. It was quite the struggle getting here, but I finally made it, and I'm actually going to pick up your Voltorb for the Magnet item, just in case I want Gyarados to use Thunderbolt, and I need that little bit of extra damage. At level 25, Milotic gets Twister, which I teach over Mimic, and then I go to the Realgam Tower to pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and at the same time I may as well pick up the TM for Blizzard just in case I need it, and I go ahead and teach Hidden Power right away. Gyarados has Hidden Power Water, which is okay. It's a stab option that it doesn't normally get at this point, but it could be better. And Milotic has Hidden Power Poison, which really doesn't do anything for it because pretty soon it's going to be getting a much better move to deal with grass types. Soon after, I go to the Tutor Lady to go pick up the move for Body Slam and teach that over Tackle. And I decide to pick up the Swinub here because I will get access to the Ice Beam TM pretty soon, and getting the Never Melt Ice item could be kinda nice. Unfortunately, it breaks free and I'm out of Pokeballs. Okay, well that's a bit unfortunate, but I teach Ice Beam to Milotic over Hidden Power and go into the battle against Snaddle. He leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire, and I need to get rid of Lantern quickly because it has Electric type moves that do 4 times damage to Gyarados, and luckily it does get flinched by Twister. Now I didn't realize, but Gyarados is actually -1 speed now, so Milotic outspeeds, thus making me not deal water damage to Lunatone when it first comes out. So now I'm in a bit of a bad spot. So Water Pulse into it, which doesn't quite finish it off, and neither does Body Slam. Another Rock Tomb, lowering my speed, but now Gyarados is faster. So the turn order between the two is back to normal. I go for Body Slam to finish off Lunatone, and Ice Beam to start dealing damage to the Cast Form coming out. Shadow Wave actually does quite a bit of damage to me though. Ice Beam does nearly half to Cast Form, and it gets a Lucky Freeze, that's nice. Quagsire is going to just be using Rock Tomb until one of us is slower, then it'll start using Slam, but I want to take it down now that the Cast Form is frozen, which it goes down to just a couple of hits. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Metang. I go for Dragon Rage and Ice Beam, which Dragon Rage does quite a bit. Thunder Punch finishes off Milotic, and hopefully Cast Form doesn't thaw. It does, hits me with a Shockwave and finishes me off. Well, that was a pretty close first attempt, so I think I'm just going to head straight back into the second attempt. This time, I am still going to hope for the flinch, but unfortunately I don't get it this time. Luckily, it doesn't decide to attack Gyarados, and Quagsire actually misses a Rock Tomb. I finish off the Lantern. Out comes Lunatone, and this time, because the turn order isn't messed up, Water Pulse actually hits its target and confuses, but I'm not going to rely on that so it can set up Shadow Sky. So I finish it off with Water Pulse. Out comes Cast Form, go for Body Slam into it, doing well over half. Rock Tomb lowers Melodic speed, go for Body Slam and Water Pulse into it, which Body Slam finishes it off, and out comes the Metang once again. Water Pulse does just under half. Rock Tomb hits, lowering Gyarados' speed. Go for Dragon Rage and Twister, hoping for a flinch. But because last time I know that Dragon Rage does over half, I'm able to finish off my Tang, and then all that's left is the Quagsire, who I know can't survive an Ice Beam and Body Slam. So with that, Snaddle is defeated, and we move on to Jobin, who also has a Gyarados. Goodbye, the Gyarados. At level 30, Milotic gets Recover, which I teach over Attract, and on the SS Libra, I get the Flamethrower TM, which I teach over Hidden Power. So I move on to the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. Now I do need to get a little bit lucky here that Electrode doesn't hit Gyarados, which it doesn't. Go for Ice Beam, which does have to Electrode. Go for Body Slam into Nuzleaf. Spark gets a crit on Milotic, doing quite a lot of damage. Nuzleaf does go down to a Flamethrower. Out comes Vileplume. Ice Beam takes down the Electrode. Out comes Whiscash. I go for Flamethrower into the Vileplume, which doesn't quite take it down. Go for Recover, bringing myself up to half health. Water Pulse unfortunately confuses Milotic. Giga Drain takes it back down to 15 HP. And even though I really want to take down Vileplume, I decide to attack the Whiscash with Body Slam and Ice Beam the Vileplume, which does take it down. And at level 35, Milotic tries to line Rain Dance. I think about it for a second and decide not to do it. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory. Now, unfortunately, Gyarados is paralyzed now. Go for Ice Beam to start dealing damage to it, and it does take half. Milotic goes down, and Whiscash has Spark. Okay, well, it was a good first attempt, but unfortunately, it is going to take a second. And once again, I do need to get lucky on the first turn that Electrode doesn't hit Gyarados, which it doesn't. Body Slam takes Electrode down to half. Unfortunately, Gyarados also gets paralyzed. Go for Ice Beam into the Nuzleaf to finish it off, and then out comes Vileplume. Electrode gets paralyzed. Flamethrower starts dealing damage to Vileplume. Ice Beam to finish off Vileplume, and then out comes the Whiscash. Electrode is paralyzed, and so is Gyarados. Go for another Body Slam and Ice Beam to start dealing damage to Whiscash. Spark gets a crit, taking Milotic down to 2 HP. Body Slam takes Whiscash down very low though too. Go for Body Slam to finish off Electrode finally, and Twister to finish off the Whiscash, bringing out his final Pokemon once again, Skarmory. Spark actually didn't do as much damage as I thought it would. Skarmory's now very low. Go for Twister to finish off the Electrode and deal damage to Skarmory. It flinches, and that's enough for Gyarados to come through with a Flamethrower. At the top of the pyramid, I get the TM for Earthquake, which I teach over Hidden Power, and because I taught Earthquake, I also need to teach Protect to Milotic, which I decide to teach over Twister. And then I move into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio. I go for Body Slam and Water Pulse into it, which does do quite a lot of damage, taking it down to red. Celio hits a very weak Earthquake on Milotic, and I go for Earthquake myself, which takes down the Lairon and finishes off the Celio, bringing out Slowking and Ursaring. Now Ursaring is going to protect on the first turn, however it might be acting kinda strange because it didn't this time. Ice Beam and Body Slam don't quite finish off Slowking. It goes for Headbutt. Okay, well I go for Protected Earthquake, which takes down Slowking and does quite a bit of damage to Ursaring. Then out comes Shadow Primeape, and luckily Slash doesn't hit Milotic. Go for Ice Beam to start dealing damage to Primeape, and luckily it does do over half. Ursaring's taken down by a Body Slam, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. Shadow Rush doesn't really do that much damage. Go for Protect and Earthquake once again, taking Primeape down and doing quite a bit of damage to Hypno. It hits a Shadow Storm in Desperation, but doesn't really do that much damage. And Ice Beam and Body Slam finish off the Hypno. So with that, Gorgon is defeated, and we can move on to the last area of the game. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is going very poorly, and these Pokemon could actually end up near the bottom of the tier list. So let's hope that they can catch up. I go into the battle against Lavrina. She leads with a Gorbis and a Gardevoir. I go for Earthquake and Protect on the first turn, hoping to take them both down, but Gardevoir survives on a sliver, and Gorbis actually survives with quite a bit of health. Gyarados gets attracted, which is very unfortunate. I go for Ice Beam to finish off the Gorbis, which gets rid of the attraction, and now I can Body Slam into the Gardevoir to take it down. Farfetch'd and Roselia come down. Between the two, Farfetch'd is definitely scarier, but I'd rather have them both off the field. Ice Beam takes down Farfetch'd. I decide not to learn Attract. Out comes her Shadow Altaria, and I go for Body Slam to finish off the Roselia. Then all that's left is that Shadow Altaria, which goes down to a single Ice Beam. So with that, we move on to the top of the mountain against Snaddle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Tank. And because Milotic is pretty tanky, I decide to go for Ice Beam and Earthquake. It's a little risky, but I think it's going to pay off if I can get through this first piece of the battle very quickly. Out comes Scizor and Solrock. If I can one-shot Solrock, this is going to be very good. I do, which brings out Cast Form, and Gyarados definitely takes down Scizor with Flamethrower. And then out comes the infamous Starmie, which if it outspeeds can do a ton of damage. I decided to go for Protect and Earthquake, which Earthquake gets a crit and takes it down, and gets a crit on Cast Form and takes it down too. Okay, well that was definitely very lucky, but we take those. Moving on to Ardos, he leads with an Alakazam and Swellow. Now I don't outspeed the Swellow. Ice Beam takes it down though, and Gyarados doesn't outspeed the Alakazam, so it hits a Thunder Punch on Milotic, luckily. And also Gyarados doesn't quite one-shot it either. It does get a Paralysis, and the Fruity Pebbles finish the job, but that is a little scary that it might be a range. Out comes Heracross and Kingdra. Go for Flamethrower and Ice Beam into Heracross to guarantee I take it down quickly. And then out comes Electabuzz. And once again, because I know that Milotic is pretty tanky, I think I can go for Ice Beam and Earthquake, which Ice Beam takes Kingdra down pretty low. Shadow Break hits Gyarados, taking it down to 32. Earthquake finishes off Kingdra and takes down Electabuzz in a single hit, and then out comes Snorlax. Now Snorlax is the biggest threat because Milotic really can't do anything to it. It is incredibly specially tanky. So I go for Protect and Earthquake, which isn't really doing that much damage. Fruity Pebbles are raining down, dealing constant damage to Milotic. Go for Recover, and Body Slam takes Snorlax down to half. And luckily Snorlax actually misses a Shadow End. I go for another Protect and Earthquake, taking Snorlax down to red. Another Shadow End into Milotic, luckily protected. Ice Beam takes it down very low into red, and Body Slam finishes it off. So with that, Ardos is defeated on the first try. With a little luck. I decide to teach Thunderbolt over Flamethrower, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring. I go for Ice Beam into the Slowking and Thunderbolt, which takes the Slowking down in a single hit with a crit. Then out comes Aggron. Ursaring uses Slash, luckily no crit, and that's not really doing that much damage. Earthquake takes Aggron down in a single hit, and does respectable damage to Ursaring. Out comes Walrein. I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam into the Ursaring to try to finish it off, but it actually uses Protect this time. And Walrein hits a very weak Earthquake. Go for another Protect and Earthquake to deal damage back. Walrein goes down, and Ursaring goes down. Then out comes his two final Shadow Pokemon. Oh, Dragon Dance. Yes, I will. Plus attack and speed. I'll teach that over Bite. Out comes Poliwrath, and then out comes Mr. Mime. Now, I do think I will be able to take down the Mime with Earthquake, so I decide to Protect. And Mr. Mime does in fact go down. Poliwrath sets up Shadow Sky like it always does. And then all I need is a Body Slam and a Ice Beam. Not Water Pulse because I think it has Water Absorb. And I'm able to take it down. So with that, we move on to Eldest. He leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask. And I need to take down Manectric immediately because it will set up Shadow Sky. I go for Protect and Earthquake, but unfortunately Manectric does outspeed Gyarados, so it's able to set it up. And then out comes Shadow Salamence. Now this thing is quite a threat, so I think I'm going to double into it. And because I know that Thunderbolt is going to be doing decent damage to it, I decided to use that. In hindsight, Body Slam was probably the better move, because in this case, Ice Beam actually takes it down in a single hit. And then out comes Flygon, a ground type immune to electric type moves, which is just kind of unfortunate. I go for Body Slam this time and Ice Beam, which will guarantee take down the Flygon in a single hit, and then out comes Marowak. which is always a bit of a threat if it's left unchecked, but unfortunately for it, it does have a very low special defense stat, so I can just go for Ice Beam to take it down. And then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Lapras, which is quite possibly the most dangerous thing on his team, because if Shadow Sky is up, it's going to be using Shadow Storm, and its Shadow Storms are very strong. Thunderbolt is doing quite a bit to it. Shadow Storm comes out. Actually not doing as much as I thought it would. Okay, well, I go for another Thunderbolt and Ice Beam. Ice Beam to finish off the Ninjask, and Thunderbolt to finish off the Lapras. And not quite, it's very close though. It has to set up Shadow Sky because Shadow Sky just ended. And one last Ice Beam finishes it off. So with that, we beat Eldis. And before I get on to the Big Box Legendary, I run into another Milotic. Goodbye, other Milotic. And another Gyarados. Goodbye, other Gyarados. So, moving on to the Big Box Legendary, Shadow Lugia. And honestly, I have everything I need to take it down quickly. I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam. Unfortunately, it does outspeed both of us, so that is very unfortunate. I am able to take it down to half though. Another Shadow Blast takes Gyarados down to 63. Ice Beam and Thunderbolt to finish it off. And we move on to the battle against Greevil. He leads with a Shadow Moltres and Rhydon. I go for Water Pulse to take down Rhydon immediately. Then out comes Executor. I use Thunderbolt with Gyarados, doing about a third to Moltres, but it goes down in a single hit. Water Pulse finishes off Moltres. And then out comes Tauros, which apparently Shadow Sky actually raises shadow damage by 50%, so maybe I don't want to keep Tauros around as often as I usually do. But on the other hand, it's also very easy to set up against because it always uses Shadow Sky followed by Shadow Hold, and as long as one of your Pokemon uses Protect, it'll have to use it again, which is very nice. Anyway, I decided to keep it around this attempt because it's just Milotic, but on the next attempt, now that I have both Pokemon back in working order, I go for Water Pulse, which doesn't quite take down Moltres on a single hit, and I decide to go for Dragon Dance. Mr. Shadow End hits, getting crit, taking Gyarados down immediately, which is very unfortunate. Water Pulse finishes off Moltres. Out comes Executor once again. Shadow End misses this time, go for Water Pulse to take it down. Out comes the Tauros once again. And because there's nothing I can really do, eventually I will be taken down, but not before I get a little bit of experience from the Executor. And then out comes the Articuno, who will definitely finish me off. Shadow Rush doesn't quite do the job. Ice Beam only does half to Tauros. Lucky Freeze, but it doesn't matter, and I go down. Okay, well now on the fourth attempt, and after using up all my rare candies, I go into the battle once again. This time, go for Water Pulse to take down the Rhydon immediately. Just as I did on the first attempt, out comes Executor. Go for Thunderbolt, which now does half to Moltres, but I'm not quite sure if it was a range or not, so I decide to go for Dragon Dance and Water Pulse to finish it off. And then out comes Tauros once again. I go for Dragon Dance, raising my attack up to neutral once again, and also I'm faster than Milotic now. Go for Body Slam and Ice Beam, which takes down Tauros. And then out comes Articuno. And between the two, Articuno is definitely the bigger threat. However, if I take down Executor, then he reveals his final of the three legendary birds, Zapdos, which, while is still incredibly strong, isn't nearly as strong as Articuno is in this specific matchup. So I go for Body Slam and Ice Beam to finish it off in a single turn, which Body Slam does nearly half and Ice Beam finishes it off. And all that's left now is Articuno, without the luck of Executor hitting a Shadow End. So Body Slam takes it down to yellow, and Water Pulse finishes it off. And thus I beat the game, and how well did they do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 20 hours, 24 minutes, and 56 seconds at level 57 for Gyarados and 61 for Milotic. And they had 37 losses throughout the game. Only 5 of those being to bosses, which is still pretty good, but you can definitely figure out where a lot of the time was lost. It took 6 hours and 13 minutes to evolve into Gyarados, and from there it took 4 hours for Gyarados and Milotic to beat the game. So no doubt, Gyarados and Milotic are incredible Pokemon. However, Magikarp and Feebas are so abysmally bad that it brings them all the way down to the E tier, with its only other occupant being Eevee, the first ever video I did, and a video that I really need to redo because honestly I was goofing around for most of it, kind of getting an idea of the game and figuring out how I was going to actually format these videos. But there is one thing to note, and that's that had I actually figured out how to use Magikarp and Feebas effectively at the beginning, I know they could be a little bit faster, but even still, Attract can only do so much, and even if it took off an hour real time, 2 hours of game time, it still would have ended up in the D tier, which isn't that much better. So, in any case, they unfortunately wind up very bad. But if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!